Hi everyone, welcome to GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel. Thanks for joining us from the new downtown studios here at GoLocal Prov. I'd like to welcome on my very first guest here, House Minority Leader Blake Filippi. Thank you for joining us today, Leader.
Happy to be here, Kate. Thank you.
Beginning of February, and gosh, it seems like the session's already been in for about 6 months. So talk with us a little bit. Of course, the Joint Committee on Legislative Services has really dominated the news cycle so far, obviously with the Speaker's call for the audit, then rescinding it. Now, there have been some reports just today of a grand jury convened, but regardless, the Attorney General and the state police are looking into it. At what point do we have a crisis in government?
I don't know. I don't know what point we have a crisis in government. I guess, the tree is known by thine fruit, and I think we have to see what fruit government produces over the next few months to determine whether we have a crisis or not.
So you don't think this has the capacity to be a major distraction in the way that lawmakers move forward with the necessary legislation to run the state here?
I think it could be a distraction, but there are always distractions. There are always external issues. And it's up to us as policymakers to rise above that and do what's best for the people, despite all the stuff going on in the background.
Now, with the JCLS, of course, you are moving forward with the lawsuit. Now, we have talked about this, really looking to get a sense of what the structure legally, what the JCLS can and can't do. Where are things with the status of that lawsuit?
Sure. So to go back, I don't want to correct you, but I want to state that it's not what JCLS can or can't do. It's what the chairman, the speaker who's the chairman, what he can or cannot do without coming to the JCLS. And that's the ultimate gravement of our lawsuit. And that's at the core of our claims. The status of it is that it's pending. Since the audit was withdrawn, much of the material in our lawsuit is now extraneous statements. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to be filing an amended complaint soon, most likely, okay, that really focuses in on the core legal issues of the speaker and the executive director's authority to act without coming to the JCLS board.
And what does that mean moving forward then, if you're waiting to hear from the courts as to, again, that power of the chairman? The JCLS, $47 million budget, there's stuff to be done. Does it have any sort of impact on the activities and the role that the JCLS plays currently? Again, is it just specifically to the decisions made by the chair, who is the Speaker of the House?
I think there are outstanding questions, legal questions, about every decision that's made without it coming before JCLS. I mean, JCLS, I think, has the ability to delegate some of its statutory responsibilities to the chair or to the executive director, but it never has. So I think there's a lot of outstanding questions in our day-to-day at the State House about whether we're even doing things legally. Mm. With that being said, we're not about to run to court and shut down the General Assembly, right?
No.
We wouldn't do that, and I don't think the court would entertain it.
Yep.
Excuse me, because the body has to operate. So as much as we want to prove our legal case, we're not trying to be obstructionist to throw a monkey wrench in the operations of state government. Like, we know that building needs to operate. So we're being careful about the way we proceed so we don't mess up the building.
And is there one of the questions, too, about whether or not Executive Director Frank Montanaro, again, how he came to that position as well? Is that one of the things that you're trying to figure out through the court system? Is that position, was that legally constituted?
So I think there's a legal question right now about everyone who works in the building. Specifically with Frank, I think that is and Frank's a friend. This is strictly a legal issue. And the legal issue is the person who's exercising the executive power of the JCLS, who's making decisions that are statutorily imbued in JCLS, is Frank Montanaro even legally there, since the board never voted to appoint him? Now, because he exercises such control, given the nature of the executive director position, I think that is a legal question which has to be resolved.
There are a lot of outstanding legal issues.
There are, but I think it's such an important body that we need to make sure that it's operating properly. It's spending $46.5 million, hires everybody in the General Assembly. Who gets office space? Who doesn't get office space? Who gets what parking spot? What offices get renovated? Where the heat goes on? Where the heat doesn't go? It's everything.
Literally all of that.
It's everything. It's everything. So I think it's critical to resolve these issues, but to do it in a way that's responsible, that doesn't mess up the building and allows lawmakers to go about our important duty of passing laws and hopefully repealing some too.
So one of the articles that GoLocal broke recently was, of course, the mold potential issue in the JCLS offices, which was found not to be the case. But we did find Executive Director Frank Montanaro did call a company, didn't need to necessarily probably go out to bid, but did happen to be a friend of his. Now, we were contacted by another mold remediation company that said, hey, can we take a look at how this whole structure works? Is that an issue? Now, the fact of the matter is, yep, could have been an emergency, yep, had to get someone in there right away. But just the specter of, you got to know someone to get the job.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not happy with reading the news report, especially because the action of renovating office space, maintaining office space, is a statutory duty of the JCLS. So I think that this story about what happened, whether it's legal or not, I don't know that it is or isn't, I don't have enough facts, but it just shows that if the JCLS had actually met, if a meeting had been called and we were told we have this problem, we have to renovate it, we would like to hire this company, the sole source vendor, we most likely would have voted to do that and there wouldn't be a problem. And process, it just goes to show that process really matters. And I think I analogize it to the speaker's call for the audit of the Convention Center Authority. If the speaker had called a meeting and we had talked about it and we had all voted, there wouldn't really be an issue. It just goes to show that process matters and the JCLS has a role and it needs to be used.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. One of the issues that you raised actually after all the tearing up of the office took place, you said, Frank Montanaro, I need to know what was actually taken out of this office. Have we gotten to the bottom of that? I mean, clearly a lot of information probably was contained in these JCLS offices. Where are we with that? Because here you are, a member of a board that is a body that doesn't meet, and significant holdings within the office itself. Where are we with that when you issued that letter saying, I need to know what was in there before and what's currently in there now? Yeah,
so I had written a letter to Frank saying, listen, I wasn't making allegations that things were thrown in dumpsters. My point was, as a member of JCLS, I had a right to know. I had a right to vote on it, but at the very least, send me an email, let me know that all of our JCLS files were going to be ripped out of the office and moved somewhere else. Frank responded a couple days later with a list of all the files.
Okay.
So could there have been a more complete response? Yes, but it was a valiant effort to give me a list of all the files that were moved, and I'm happy about that.
So you got some of the information, and you're good with what you got.
Yeah. I'm good with what I got. I would have liked more, but I didn't have such an incomplete response that it necessitated us going back to court. We don't want to run to court unless it's necessary. That's not the way we operate.
As you said before, with the first, the lawsuit saying you've got business to actually conduct up there while this is going on. But finally on the J's, we'll put the JCLS issue maybe to bed today, maybe not.
Maybe not.
But we had former Director of Administration Gary Sass come in, and he's reviewed the issue before when he was Director of Administration and said, look, a couple of things. The Senate should have another member so that there's parity amongst the two branches. And then said it really should be perhaps maybe professionalized. Let's get a sense of what these job duties are, of who's being awarded jobs, who are they awarded to and why. Pending again this legal look at it in the courts, do you foresee the potential for major structural changes to the JCLS?
So there's a lot to unpack there. Mr. Sass's comment about there needs to be parity between the House and Senate, I would be concerned about, because you need to have an odd number on a board. You can't have 3-3 because you could end in deadlock, right? So, I mean, all boards have, not all, the vast majority of boards have an odd number for a reason. And so I don't know how you fix that without setting us up for bigger problems down the road. I think you fix many of the problems through structural reforms in the rules. I think the Senate should have more authority over its own staff. It's committee staff, it's staff for leadership. I don't think they should need the House's permission to hire. We can fix that through the rules. But I think more fundamentally, I think the way JCLS needs to be reformed, and it's a reflection of our top-down, kind of old-school way of looking at things. My opinion is that members need to have their own staff. We're part-timers, and we don't have the ability to do the research we need, to answer all the constituent calls, to do everything we need to be responsive legislators. We don't have that ability. So my opinion is, and this really doesn't affect Republicans because we have our own office with our own staff, but my opinion is that every member should have their own staff member who answers to them, not the Speaker or the Senate President. For instance, right now, one of my Democratic colleagues needs to get research done. They go down to the research room where everyone there has been hired by the Speaker or the Senate President. And so they don't really have their own autonomy as legislators. They have to go to someone who's not beholden to them, but is beholden to leadership. I just think that's problematic. I think we need to change the culture of the General Assembly to be more bottom up as opposed to top down, and that starts with staff.
So talk with us a little bit about how that would look then, of course, with budgetary constraints, we're not adding another layer here, if you will. Would it just be a shifting of resources? So again, not having that office, as you said, controlled by leadership, but saying, okay, take that back and then giving that budgetary authority to the members themselves to say, okay, this will be then spent on a staffer that I hire.
Yeah, we are not advocating. There's plenty of employees in the State House. I assure you, we're not advocating to add any more employees. We're saying that of the hundreds of employees we have there, that 113 of them, because that's how many House and Senate members there are, should be individually controlled by a member. And then members should be able to say, hey, listen, 10 of us get along, let's pool our staff. So you could have 10 members with 10 staff people who each specialize in certain aspects and serve those members. And also, as to office space, that's another key component of the reforms, is that members should have an office in that building. They should have a priority for office space. They need places to meet their constituents and do their work. Some members, if you remember, of the Reform Caucus had their office space taken from them. I just don't think that's appropriate no matter your political disposition. I think members should be able to notify JCLS that us 10 members, we want an office. JCLS should be obligated to provide them with an office that can serve all 10 members and their staff.
So as a part-time legislator, would you need a full-time staff person to handle the research, the constituent outreach? It's like an own mini office. I mean, how would that look like from an employment standpoint?
All day long.
Yep.
And before I got up here, I would have said no. I would have been like, no, cut it. But probably the most critical office in state government is our legislature. It's a thing that affects all other things. And I can tell you, as someone who's been elected for 5 years, that many times this is a full-time job. It is a full-time job, not just when we're in session, but out of session. It really is. And I think we'd be much more autonomous, independent legislators who do a much better job drafting and passing laws that affect all of our lives if we had the support that I think we desperately need.
So this type of proposal that you're looking at, I mean, do you envision a legislative proposal to it? Or are you, again, still waiting to see how things play out up there, again, from that JCLS structural standpoint? Because as we know, JCLS impacts the employees who are up there. I mean, how do you see this proposal being floated or moving forward?
So it could be legislatively, but it also could be in the JCLS rules.
Which we're still trying to.
So we found the rules. There's rules out there on the Secretary of State's websites from, I think, 2004, and we can enact these necessary reforms through rule changes. So in the coming weeks, we're going to be proposing rule changes, I surmise, and it's up to 2 of the other 5 members to join me and call for these necessary reforms. And if 3 members of JCLS think these reforms are important, we can get them done immediately.
Have you had conversations with other members of the board, of the body?
I've had conversations, not about this reform, but we're trying to keep those conversations private because you can imagine they're delicate.
Absolutely. So it seems like just a few weeks ago, seems like years ago, that the governor put forth her blueprint for the FY 2021 spending plan for the state of Rhode Island. You had a response to that as well. Certainly weren't anticipating this taking up your time. Apart from the JCLS, of course, what we saw proposed by the governor, you raised your concerns and you raised the areas that you were amenable to. But let's talk about the House minority's agenda in terms of, okay, JCLS aside, what you're looking to accomplish this session.
So I gave a State of the State response after the governor about 2 or 3 weeks ago. If you want to see it, you can just type in my name, Blake Filippi, on YouTube. It really lays forth a smart agenda. It's everything from giving parents in failing school districts the choice to move their kids out of that school district into a different school district that isn't failing. It would empower parents to direct their child's educational future. We want to really focus on some of the environmental issues we're not focusing on in this state. Everything from our forests in western Rhode Island, which are primed for a fire like we had in 1942 here.
Really?
Yeah, we had a horrible forest fire here in 1942, where the National Guard was called out and states of emergency were declared in 3 towns. We really want to look at cleaning up some of our water supplies. Up to 10% of children in our urban core have lead poisoning, elevated levels of lead. And we found these, not I haven't, but industrial chemicals called PFAS has been found in many of our groundwater systems from Cumberland to Scituate to Charlestown. So I think we really need to have an adult conversation about what type of environmental policies we're going to have in this state. I think it's important to focus on climate change, but it seems like that's everyone's focus, and we're leaving critical things off the table. that we can have a direct impact on. Also, we're critically underfunding DEM, our Department of Environmental Management. So that's our environmental stuff. We've got tons of great economic development ideas about stopping corporate welfare, reforming our tax code and our regulatory code to empower ground-up business development, proposals to keep our seniors here. They're not just going to Florida for the weather. And God, where else? We have a great proposal to preserve our shoreline access in this state. We have a constitutional right to walk on the shore, and it's just been really undefined where that property line is. And it's caused a lot of conflict. We're looking to fix that. Check out the speech. It's good. It's about 10 minutes, much shorter than the governor's, and it lays forth a really robust legislative agenda for Republicans.
So let's talk a little bit about that, especially from the economic development standpoint, because the pocketbook issues tend to be the important ones up here. In terms of Rhode Island's economy as we're here in 2020, what can you boil down a little bit into what you see as necessary, as you said, to really support those small businesses? You talk about regulation, you talk about cutting the red tape, but what you hear from constituents, what you hear from the rest of the minority office, what in your estimation is the most critical to help those businesses in need?
So I'll speak from 50,000 feet and then zoom in. I think from 50,000 feet, it's a philosophy. It's a governing philosophy in this state about the role of government. Many of my counterparts believe that we need to have a government-planned economy, and our opinion, respectfully my opinion, is that the government really shouldn't be intervening in the economy. It should be setting up a structure that allows people to flourish, and it'll figure itself out. I think people are better spending their money than government. And also our corporate welfare system scares away regular investment because people don't want to compete against those who are getting government subsidies. So that's kind of the 50,000-foot philosophical view of our economy. I think as we zoom in, we've looked before at the TPP tax, the tangible personal property tax. It's basically a local tax that's assessed on your inventory and equipment for basically every business. So if you're someone who wants to build a factory and invest in some really high-tech equipment, you're going to be taxed big time when you upgrade to that equipment. Every year, it's essentially a property tax. We think that's something that should really be looked at because it inhibits investment. And then the regulatory state, I'll just give you an example. I own a business, and I had to get a $200 litter permit to throw litter away. So that's just one example. There's thousands of examples. I have to get a hazardous chemicals permit. I don't have hazardous chemicals.
But yet you have a permit.
But I have to have a permit.
You could have hazardous chemicals.
I have to do a filing and pay a fee. So it's like a death by 1,000 razor cuts with our regulatory state. I think it needs to be streamlined and really just get government out of the business world, and I think beef up our protections, not through government, but through a robust tort law system where injured people can seek expedited relief in the courts when they're injured. And I believe that will cause businesses to be safe, where they don't need to have government breathing down their throats. Their economic pecuniary interests will force them to be better.
Do you think you could get any traction on that up there?
I don't know. There's things that I thought that we wouldn't get traction on in the past that have. I don't know how things shake out. Really, it's a crazy building.
It is, and of course, we've seen quite the month so far, and we're already into February here. And I know we have to get you up there, so anything else you wanted to share? Oh, I think we've kind of run the gamut here. I know folks probably had a lot of questions, again, about your involvement with where things were at the JCLS, but of course, we wanted to talk about your priorities for the coming year. Anything else you want to share with viewers while we have you?
Also with the JCLS, one thing we're looking at is the legislative grant program. As a member of JCLS, I should be approving legislative grants. I think they're unconstitutional, illegal. I won't approve them. But right now, we're talking about things that the Speaker and Frank Montanaro do that they don't come to the board for permission on. One of those, even if legislative grants are legal under our state constitution, they have to be approved by the Joint Committee on Legislative Services, not by the Speaker. And legislative grants are basically handouts to reps and senators to give to little leagues and stuff in their district. All worthy causes, but there's substantial legal questions about whether they're even constitutional. And even if they are, the JCLS body should be meeting to approve them as opposed to leadership handing them out to loyal members of the body.
Well, we'll see what happens with the JCLS legislative grants and legislation up at the Rhode Island State House. So House Minority Leader Blake Filippi, thank you for being put through the paces here on GoLocal Live, and thank you for watching us here again in our new studios in downtown Providence. We look forward to bringing you more news, lifestyle, politics, and sports on GoLocal Live. I'm GoLocal News Editor Kate Nagel.
Thank you, Kate.